everyone. Welcome to the HSS seminar series. We're delighted to have Dr. Faizullah Yilmaz present his work titled Overcoming Nihilism Through Sufism, Muhammad Iqbal and His Philosophy. Before we start, if I could request students to just come up to the main table just so we can sort of fill up some of these spaces as well. Thank you very much. About Dr. Faizullah Yilmaz completed his PhD in political science at Sabancı University in Istanbul, Turkey in 2016. In his dissertation entitled Overcoming Nihilism Through Sufism, Muhammad Iqbal, His Philosophy and Political Theology, Dr. Yilmaz analyzed Iqbal's philosophy within the context of and as a response to the problem of nihilism as it was debated in modern German philosophy. His articles were published by the Oxford Journal of Islamic Studies and Open Philosophy. From 2018 to 2024, Faizullah Yilmaz worked as an assistant professor at the Department of Political Science and International Relations at Sabahat Zaim University in Istanbul. In 2024, he joined LAMS as a Bard Fellow, where he focuses on developing his dissertation into a book manuscript and teaching courses in political science. Dr. Faizullah, over to you.
Thank you very much for coming, and thank you, Ilyas and Umair, for organizing this, giving me the opportunity to share my research. Today, my talk will be based on my dissertation, particularly the first part of my dissertation, where I'm actually making my argument. So this is the kind of outline that I'll be following. I'll start with the general interest that motivates me to focus on Iqbal or modern Islamic thought in general. I will briefly refer to two problems by talking about the literature, relevant literature about them maybe. And then I'll present my main argument, actually like Umair also already presented that. And then on the basis of that argument, I will try to put forward my analysis of Iqbal's article on Abdul Karim al-Jili published in 1900. So how it was situated in the context of this pantheism controversy, and then how Iqbal actually utilized al-Jili's philosophy, metaphysics, to contribute to that debate. And then I'll end with some concluding remarks. So there's this general interest that motivates me that can be formulated in different ways. For instance, generally on the most broadest way, maybe like how to study non-European, non-Western philosophers, thinkers, more specifically like how to study Islamic philosophy, modern Muslim thinkers, and more specifically maybe how to study Iqbal's ideas. This was by the time I was deciding on my dissertation topic, these debates were more prevalent, let's say, and more recent. There was these attempts from political theory, from philosophy, with the subdisciplines emerging within these areas, for instance, such as comparative political theory, comparative philosophy, global intellectual history. Very briefly, the goal is to, or like the concern, or the problem is that these disciplines are Eurocentric in terms of the questions that are studied, in terms of the thinkers that are focused on, in terms of the resources that are used, in terms of the methodologies utilized, for instance. So the goal is to go beyond these Eurocentric parochial perspectives, let's say, if we are going to talk about political theory as a human concern, as a human subject, let's say, rather than a European issue. So in certain ways, they were criticizing the existing scholarship on these non-European thinkers, for instance, why they are not included in philosophy departments, why they are not studied in philosophy departments, for instance. Of course, they were being studied in area studies, regional studies, but not in philosophy departments or in political science departments, because they were usually understood to be too mystical, too religious, in other words, not philosophical or theoretical. Oliver Lehman also mentions one problem related to these studies, that they usually utilize the history of ideas approach, meaning they are mostly interested in historical questions, such as how a certain concept or a term or an idea has moved from one particular historical context to another, from one thinker to another, for instance, and sometimes who influenced whom. This is, as I will say shortly, this is a very common way of approaching Iqbal's studies as well, like how Iqbal was influenced by certain European thinkers, for instance. Especially this becomes problematic when it's combined with this Orientalist assumption that generally, of course, also non-Europeans, but also particularly non-Muslims cannot actually create original work all by themselves, so they must have been influenced by some other European thinkers. So in order to overcome maybe the problems of these kind of approaches, Lehman and Hussein Nasr, for instance, argue that actually we also need a philosophical approach, meaning we also need to focus on the philosophical value of these arguments, and then we need to situate these thinkers in their particular philosophical context to see like which philosophical problems they were engaged with and what kind of solutions they were proposing, offering to these problems, so that their ideas are not studied, let's say, merely as fossils in a museum of history of ideas, but rather they are understood as a part of a dynamic debate, an ongoing philosophical debate. And I think like studying Iqbal is relevant to rethink these methodological problems for at least two reasons. One is Iqbal actually was aware of these problems as early as 1900. In this article on al-Jili, he was criticizing European scholars for paying attention like to Hindu philosophy, but then dismissing Muslim philosophy as unprogressive repetition of Plato and Aristotle. And then he takes it upon himself actually to show the originality of Islamic philosophy. And he wants to do this by focusing on a part of Islamic philosophy that he thinks has generally been condemned under the contemptuous name of mysticism. The second reason is that Iqbal's own work also has been subjected to this, to these kind of studies, to this kind of approach, who influenced whom, maybe combined with the Orientalist assumption. So, especially after the publication of Esrar Hudi in English in 1920, many European scholars wrote like his concept of perfect man is influenced by Nietzsche. His idea of selfhood, for instance, is just an eclectic combination of different European thinkers. Edward Brown, for instance, went further to say like his ideas are just merely an Oriental adaptation of Nietzsche's ideas, Nietzsche's philosophy. And these studies are not just a matter of history, let's say. I mean, if you continue focusing on more contemporary studies on Iqbal, you can see these kind of studies pervading maybe in Iqbal literature. These are some other examples. I will not go into the details of these, but you can see like this notion of like this emphasis on influence. The second problem I would like to talk about is like more specific to the Iqbal literature itself. Fazlur Rahman gives this, or like mentions this problem. I mean, again, you can find this mentioned by different authors, but I will just give his opinion. He calls this the peril of subjectivism. What he means by that is that approaching Iqbal's writing selectively and then to project onto Iqbal's ideas whatever ideology one has, let's say. So then Iqbal's ideas have been taken to support any kind of ideology from conservatism to communism. Iqbal is a supporter of democracy, an enemy of democracy, all these kind of type of studies. Actually, Fazlur Rahman thinks this is really a serious case in Iqbal literature. Like he makes this case like next to the Prophet. He thinks Iqbal has been subjected to the greatest amount of posthumous tyranny of interpretation at the expense of a genuine understanding. And related to that, you can also see like Iqbal Singh Seva is talking about like this problem in a different way. Much of the scholarship on Iqbal, he says, seeks to appropriate him in support of the demand for Pakistan. I didn't start this. So there are these certain problems, let's say, I mean, selectivism, subjectivism, and maybe misappropriation in certain ways. Again, this is not a, let's say, a problem that you would find or like that you would face in historical studies, let's say, but it's a continuing problem in Iqbal literature. I just gave 3 examples from some of the professors here who published recently, relatively recently, and if you read their introductions, for instance, you would see like they're also complaining about the same problem pervading Iqbal studies, Iqbal literature. The most recent one is Numan Faizi's, of course. And one exemplification of these problems, like the selectivism, subjectivism, and misappropriation issues, is this narrative which you can find in almost all books and articles which talks about Iqbal's intellectual development. I call it the established narrative. because it is widespread. It is found in almost all writings, which basically divides the evolution of Iqbal's ideas into these three stages. Before going to Europe, he was a supporter of Indian nationalism, and he held pantheistic ideas. And during his stay in Europe, he went through some kind of metaphysical, ideological transformation. And then when he returned to India, he became a supporter of Muslim nationalism, and he started presenting theistic ideas. So what should be done, in my understanding, like deriving from the writings of Lehman and Hussein Nasr, for instance, we should be complementing a history of ideas approach with a philosophical one, so that we can both contextualize Iqbal's ideas, and then we can also show how he responded to certain philosophical problems. And to follow that, my argument is that Iqbal's ideas, philosophy, should be actually understood and analyzed within the context of and as a response to the problem of nihilism, as it was debated in modern German philosophy during the pantheism controversy during the 18th and 19th centuries. And Iqbal's response to it is usually based upon Sufism, but as his understanding of the problem of nihilism evolves, his response to it also takes maybe a reconstructed form of Sufism. So as opposed to this established narrative, as I call it, so what I'm offering is like two things basically: an alternative historical narrative regarding the evolution of Iqbal's ideas, and how I do this is that I actually categorize Iqbal's intellectual development on the basis of his engagement with the problem of nihilism. So the part that I will present today, which goes back to 1900 and 1908, I call it first overcoming, because I think like Iqbal believed that he found a plausible solution to the problem of nihilism. That's why I call it first overcoming. And then comes the crisis period, during which he becomes disillusioned with this solution. And then we can consider Esrar Khudi actually the initial version of the second solution that he developed. But then it becomes more systematic in time. And then with the reconstruction of religious thought in Islam, we find a more systematic, comprehensive, sophisticated elaboration and analysis of the problem, and then response to it. That's why I call it the second overcoming. So basically, engaging with the problem of nihilism for the first time, and first overcoming crisis, and then second overcoming. So as I said, like my talk today will be focused on this first part. And to do this, I focus on Iqbal's article on Abdul Karim al-Jili. To my knowledge, I mean, no Iqbal scholar has studied this article. There have been some brief references by Mustansir Mir, Anmar Shimel, to say, for instance, Iqbal's ideas on the Insan al-Kamil has been inspired by al-Jili's Insan al-Kamil, but beyond that, no Iqbal scholar, to my knowledge again, has studied this article in details. And on the contrary, I think like this article is very important for various reasons. Why? It's like a prototype of Iqbal's philosophy actually. It gives us many ideas that remains with Iqbal through his life. For instance, the extent of his knowledge and interest in philosophy, his cross-cultural approach, his situatedness in tasawwuf, for instance, and more importantly than this, of course, like which philosophical problem he was interested in and what kind of a solution he developed to that. So from the references, for instance, we understand that he studied on modern German philosophy, or he has interest in these different fields. References to thinkers like Kapila, Shankaracharya from the Indian tradition, Hindu philosophy. But the article itself is about a Sufi, Abdul Karim al-Jili, a 14th century thinker who is a commentator on Ibn Arabi, who is actually a part of the Akbarian tradition. And also in the article, Iqbal refers to Ibn Arabi as the greatest of the Muhammadan Sufis. Okay. But the article also helps us understand Iqbal's awareness with the pantheism controversy. And this controversy is important because it was during the context of this debate that the term nihilism was first debated as a philosophical problem. And it was Friedrich Jacobi to name it. And from the article, we also understand how Iqbal understands the problem of nihilism. So he understands this as a problem, or as a question, about the authority of reason in providing answers to our most fundamental metaphysical questions, such as what is the origins of existence, where do we come from, what are we doing here, what is the nature of God, and so on and so forth. So I will speak for a while about the pantheism controversy itself, just to set the context, let's say. So what was the controversy about? To begin with, it was a private debate between Lessing and Mendelssohn, between Jacobi and Mendelssohn. Jacobi was a religious thinker, let's say. Mendelssohn is one of those enlightenment thinkers. They were arguing if Lessing, another enlightenment thinker, was Spinozist or not. And Jacobi was trying to show actually Lessing's philosophy was Spinozist. And this was important at that time because Spinozism was understood to be like equal to pantheism, and pantheism was understood to be identical or equal to atheism, fatalism, given Spinoza's denial of final causes, finitude of the universe, freedom of will, and supernatural and personal God. So these are some of the issues that were debated in the context of this controversy. So no final causes, for instance, meaning like no inherent purpose, goal in existence, like telos, for instance. Then like what is the meaning of existence, what is the meaning of life type of questions emerge. The nature of God, like is it immanent, is it transcendent, is it an impersonal God, is it a personal God, is it a creator God or not? Because Spinoza's, these are the problems that emanate actually from the way that Spinoza's philosophy provides answers to these questions. What is the nature of existence? Is there a dualism, for instance, like mind and matter, or is there just one substance pervading the whole existence? In the case of Spinoza, for instance, matter, there's nothing else. And how do things work actually, like the nature, the human beings? So Spinoza argues that there is laws of nature and it functions through this cause and effect mechanism. And this has implications for human beings in relation to their free will as well, because for Spinoza, it's not only the nature that works through this cause and effect mechanism, but also human beings. So there is no free will in the context of, in relation to human beings either. When the free will becomes complicated, let's say, then emerges the questions relating morality, for instance. What is good? What is bad? What is the nature of morality? What is the source of morality? Is it transcendent divine will, or is it based on human experience, rationality? But as Frederick Bider says, in its core, the debate is actually about the authority of reason, whether reason can provide answers to these questions or not. So in the context of the debate, you see two groups emerging and then trying to argue against each other. On one hand, these Enlightenment philosophers trying to defend reason in light of Jacobi's criticisms, and on the other hand, Jacobi and his supporters trying to argue that actually reason is not able to provide plausible justifications for these questions. Even worse, actually, it's undermining the justifications that we have and undermining all kinds of fundamental truths and beliefs that we have. Of course, like for Jacobi, he has the idea of Christianity. So Christianity provides these kind of answers, but reason is undermining all these answers and creating challenges for the social, moral, and political order as well. So again, like Lessing for Jacobi was just an instrument to show that philosophy is Spinozism, and if you are a philosopher, if you're relying on reason, and if you're consistent with yourself, you have to embrace the outcomes of Spinozism as well. So that means we would have to deny the existence of God. So atheism issue comes into this picture for Jacobi, like to accept God being, like, let's say, prevalent in the nature does not amount to, let's say, a God, that a conception of God that would satisfy Christians, let's say. So it has to be a personal creator God. So we would have to deny the existence of God, freedom, other minds, the external world, the permanent existence of ourselves, and maybe in short deny the existence of everything and become nihilists. So how does Iqbal engages with this debate? So so to begin with, like, he kind of positions himself between these two groups. One defends philosophy, let's say intellect, reason. The other defends more like the authority of tradition, religion, scripture, and so on. Iqbal introduces the faculty of knowledge that is utilized by tasawwuf, let's say mysticism. So he introduces the faculty of qalb in acquiring the knowledge of things. He begins in the article. He begins by making these comparisons between philosophy and mysticism, how they are similar to each other in certain ways and how they are different. But one point that he makes is that mysticism appeals to a standard higher than intellect itself, and it's, according to the mystic, it's called qalb or heart. So this framework again, like, remains with Iqbal. If you look at the reconstruction, for instance, you can see the same type of introduction to the issue, trying to defend how intuition there, for instance, is a superior faculty of knowledge compared to intellect and philosophy. But also Iqbal tries to maintain that mysticism is not just subjective, irrational form of acquiring knowledge. There is still some kind of cognitive aspect to it. There's still some kind of rationality to it. So for instance, he says, mysticism is just like philosophy. They are both based upon metaphysics. The difference is that mysticism has a religious phraseology when talking about its metaphysics, for instance. Again, it's like philosophy, it's a system of verification, meaning a way of acquiring knowledge. The difference is that it utilizes most predominantly the faculty of qalb or heart. And one superiority of the qalb, in contrast to reason, according to Iqbal, is that so Kant, when he interferes with this debate, tries to defend reason, at least like in certain respects, and comes up with this distinctions you may know, like between phenomenal realm, nominal realm, theoretical reason, practical reason. So theoretical reason is capable of providing the knowledge for the things that exist in the phenomenal realm, but not the things that are supposed to exist in the nominal realm, such as the existence of God, the existence of free will, the issue of immortality, and these kind of issues. So for Iqbal, like, what qalb reveals is not seen, and this issue leads to this Kantian dualism between subject, the knower, and the known, let's say. And what Iqbal thinks is that what qalb reveals is not seen by the individual as something separate from him or heterogeneous to him. What is shown to him through this agency is his own reality, his own deep being. So there is no separation, there is no deep, irreconcilable separation, let's say, between the subject and the object, between the knower and the known. There is a deeper unity that connects these two. And then it becomes possible for the subject actually not only to acquire the knowledge of the phenomenal realm, but also the nominal realm, because they are united, they are connected to each other. And in al-Jili's doctrine, Iqbal thinks this is called the doctrine of the identity of attribute and reality. In Hegel's doctrine, it's called the identity of thought and being. So usually, like, I mean, we can also make this parallelism, like attributes are referring to the attributes of God, pure being, the absolute, and reality is referring to the God's essence itself. But since thought and being, or attributes and reality, are related to each other, it is possible to acquire the knowledge of thought by looking at its manifestations, let's say, its signs in being, in existence. Again, like through qalb, Iqbal thinks the subject acquires knowledge through a spiritual effort and realizes it as a fact of experience, as a reality, whereas in philosophy you understand something only as theory, intellectually, let's say. And this has implications with respect to their strengths. He says, if you realize something is a spiritual fact, it would be impossible to shake the foundations of that knowledge, let's say, but if you acquire the knowledge of something through reason, let's say, then some logical flows, if there were, would lead maybe one abandoning these kind of knowledge. Yes. So what Iqbal is trying to show through focusing on al-Jili's ideas is that al-Jili's philosophy does not also lead to pantheistic conclusions, in other words, like atheistic, fatalistic conclusions. So how does he do that? First, he emphasizes al-Jili, and in this respect, essence of God is transcendent to the creation, while his existence is immanent. So it's in the creation, let's say. And again, like trying to maintain God is a personal creator God. And here actually he's showing how al-Jili disagrees with Ibn Arabi as well. So Ibn Arabi, again, like these are Iqbal's interpretation of these ideas. Ibn Arabi says God first created the idea of existence and then created the existence, let's say. And then al-Jili thinks this sounds like not creation ex nihilo, let's say, creating out of nothing, because the idea itself existed first. So in response to Ibn Arabi, let's say al-Jili puts forward a different argument, meaning like before the idea of existence existed, it was in the self of God, so it was not actually separate from the gods itself. So since there was no separation between the two, in al-Jili's interpretation, it makes way for a personal creator God, let's say. So it creates existence out of nothing from its own self. Again, talking about the nature of existence, for instance, Iqbal thinks al-Jili's philosophy is neither monistic or dualistic. It is based on this idea of unity, just like Hegel's metaphysics. The unity of the unity of attributes and reality, let's say. And the reality of the external world has also been debated as part of the pantheism controversy, especially in relation to this issue of solipsism. Solipsism means, like going all the way back to actually Descartes, to the origins of modern philosophy, that one can only verify the existence of one's own mind, the thinking being, let's say. So at the end of his meditations, Descartes arrived at this conclusion that you can only for sure, for certain, justify the existence of this thinking being. But then Descartes accepts, that you cannot even actually verify the existence of your body or the external reality. So this is also something that Iqbal, through al-Jili's ideas, tries to respond. So while discussing these issues, he also makes comparisons between the Hindu philosophy, Maya, Vedanta, and on one hand, and Fichtean idealism, Berkeleyan idealism on the other hand, for instance. So this unity between the attributes and reality is not only epistemic, let's say. So it's not only like giving you the knowledge of the reality, let's say. It's also ontological. So this also helps you understand actually the existence of the external reality according to Iqbal. Okay, I kind of made this drawing to simplify how al-Jili's metaphysics work. So pure being, God, the absolute, Iqbal uses all these terms interchangeably because he's also trying to speak to the, let's say, European philosophy, leaves its absoluteness and then goes into a process of realizing itself in existence, and then to return to its own absoluteness again. And some other issues that were discussed, let's say the purpose of existence, how do things work. So for al-Jili, absolute or God wants to be known and therefore like creates the existence and goes through a process of self-realization. And then what about human beings, for instance? Are they free or determined, let's say? Iqbal says, I mean, again, like in relation to al-Jili, God has uncaused freedom, human beings have caused freedom. So in a way, like they are partly free, partly determined. Again, like here Iqbal makes similarities or comparisons with Hegel, for instance, where Hegel also says human beings are partly free, partly determined. They can choose, shape their destinies, achieve spiritual perfection, but this is also a bit tricky. Let's say, for instance, Hegel also discusses how human beings are free in choosing their actions, desires, goals, etc., especially in relation to these world historical individuals he has in mind. But Hegel also says, actually, although these people, I mean, he gives some examples to these kind of people, such as Caesar, Christ himself, Napoleon, for instance. These people outwardly, let's say, seem to be motivated and running after their own passions, goals, interests, and also mobilizing all these people behind them. But he also says, actually, the Geist, or like the spirit itself, like manipulating them to arrive at the conclusions that it has in mind. So you may know from the Hegelian philosophy, let's say, I mean, there are certain ends that the spirit is trying to achieve, and using man, especially these world historical men, to arrive at these conclusions. So Iqbal's analysis of the role of the perfect man in the context of al-Jili's philosophy is kind of similar, you can say. So human beings also has the ability to, let's say, acquire the divine attributes of the pure being, such as independent life, existence, knowledge, will, power, and they have the ability to perfect their spiritual evolution, let's say, or spirituality, and become God-man, or the perfect man, and become capable of participating in the general life of nature. This is actually the end of my analysis of Iqbal's analysis on al-Jili, Iqbal's article on al-Jili. But then I just want to make a few evaluations regarding like the nihilism aspect of the issue. So Bernhard Regenster goes through all Nietzsche's writings. I mean, Nietzsche defines nihilism in different parts of his writings in many different ways, but he goes all through these writings and thinks that in essence these can be categorized under these two categories. Nihilism is disorientation, nihilism is despair. So disorientation, by disorientation, Regenster means that the sense that we have that our highest values lack metaphysical grounding or justification. So you can think of Jacobi and his supporters challenged by Spinoza's philosophy, leading to these conclusions, and then of course the Enlightenment philosophers' ideas leading to these conclusions, and you're losing the metaphysical justification for these ideas, beliefs that you have. And this is creating a kind of disorientation for you. I just have one quote from Nietzsche's Gay Science, for instance. I think like it very nicely illustrates this sense. This is a madman going to the market after he hears about the death of God, and then he's trying to warn other people about this incident as well. So like he's saying, who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun? Where is it moving to now? Where are we moving to? Away from all suns? Are we not continually falling backwards, sideways, forwards, in all directions? Is there still an up and down? Aren't we straying as though through an infinite nothing? So you can see like a sense of disorientation. There is no up and down anymore. The horizon is wiped out. So once you lose the horizon, you also lose your ability to orient yourself in relation to God, in relation to other beings, in relation to the nature itself, and all these other implications stemming from that, let's say, regarding morality, social order, political order, become problems. So like, why should you obey any political authority? Why should you obey any moral laws, for instance? Why should you obey any ideas about this is good, this is bad? So one last general definition I will give about nihilism. This is David Story. He says nihilism is a problem about humanity's relation to nature, about a crisis in human freedom and willing after the collapse of the cosmos, the erosion of a hierarchically ordered nature in which humans have a proper place. So you can see again, like for Jacobi and his supporters, this is what is happening. The previous cosmological, the previous cosmos, meaningful cosmos, where human beings had a proper place, where they were able to orientate themselves, let's say, in relation to other beings, collapses, or like being challenged by Spinoza's philosophy and later by the Enlightenment philosophers' ideas. So nihilism emerges as a result of that, let's say. As you may remember, like at the beginning of my presentation, I said like this orientation does not emerge for Iqbal. That's why I call it the first overcoming, because he thinks through al-Jili's metaphysics, he is able to provide plausible answers to these questions emanating from the pantheism controversy. So my concluding remarks is that if my analysis of Iqbal's article on al-Jili is correct, for a better understanding, we should situate Iqbal's ideas in this particular context. And from a methodological perspective, we should not only like think of like who influenced who, or like how different ideas, concepts, terms have moved from here to there, but also pay more attention to Iqbal's, the philosophical value of Iqbal's arguments. And also if, again, like my interpretation is correct, this article on al-Jili clearly shows that Iqbal did not have a pantheistic conception of God before going to Europe. So this also maybe to a certain degree challenges the historical narrative that I have mentioned at the beginning. So in my dissertation, I mean, I continue my analysis with Iqbal's other writings in the following years. And then I try to show like how he goes into a kind of nihilistic crisis, nihilistic mood between these 4 years especially. And then how he overcomes it again by reconstructing this solution that he believed that he found in al-Jili's metaphysics, because Iqbal also becomes disillusioned with that, I believe, especially during this 4 years period. Thank you.